Welcome to my presentation, Trump, Neo-Fascism, and the State of Democratic Resistance. My name is Jeremy Holland. I've been studying political thought and discourse and ideology, especially with extreme social movements on both the left and the right, for the last 10 years. This presentation is something I've been thinking about for quite some time, since the 2016 election, where we saw Trump winning all the debates and, to my surprise, winning the nomination of his party. This is my attempt to say, especially not just to Democrats, but also to Republicans, why we still need conservatives, but we don't need conservatives moving into a fascist party. We need conservatives that are separating themselves from Trump and waiting for the party to reestablish itself as a true conservative party. And so with this video, I'm meaning to talk to all political spectrums. I'm not going to talk just about someone in a negative way and act like my group's really great. I want to bring the conversation together because we all need each other right now really badly in this election season. Okay. So if you think about fascism as a political movement, right, this really arose in between the first two world wars in the 20th century with Mussolini in Italy, who described his paramilitary armed squads as the fascist. And these really were soldiers from the First World War that were disgruntled because they had lost, and also the rest of Europe is asking them to pay reparations back, which is causing them to have an economic crisis in their country. So there's lots of resentment to draw upon within this group. If you think about what fascism is in general, it's an anti-enlightenment ideology, right? So what we get from France during the revolution is the slogan liberty, fraternity, equality, but in fascism it's believe, obey, fight. Think about black-clad school children in fascist uniform chanting order, authority, justice, or action, not talk. And of course, the time for Socratic debate and democratic deliberation is over when the fascists come in. It's about action. What are common sides of fascist thought? I mean, why not just call Trump and his movement authoritarian and get it over with? Why the emphasis on fascism? Well, fascism is a mentality of us against them. You may think, well, that's politics. Politics is this kind of competition. That's true, but this mentality is one where we have to not concede anything to the opposition. We have to completely crush them. We have to completely replace them. We have to drive them into the ground. This is the idea. Ultranationalist, authoritarian, anti-democratic, it's a vile cocktail, right? Not just patriotic. I feel very patriotic, but ultranationalist. Mix that in with authoritarianism. There has to be this very rigid hierarchy. Usually this hierarchy is male and in origin, and very anti-democratic, right? We don't really want deliberation. We want most of the decisions to come from this one party or one person or one small group. Openly approving of political violence. Usually there's a charismatic leader that can link to ugly feelings that are underneath the surface, and so the energy is not drawn from the cultural elites, and it's not drawn just from the business community, but it's mainly drawn, it's kind of an extremism of the center, right? It's drawing energy from those who are already upset because of a lost war or a lost job, or the sense that the country isn't what it used to be, and we need to get back to what we used to have because it was way better than what we have now. And so because of this pain and resentment and probably fear that culture is changing, the leader dangles a prospect of renewal, saying, hey, I'll bring back everything that has been lost or stolen. All you have to do is trust me, put me in charge. All right, so I want to go through a few diagnostic rhetorical moves. Diagnostic meaning diagnosing the problem. What does Trump say is the problem, and how is he bringing people into his movement? Well, he positions himself as speaking up for the forgotten, left behind working man, saying things like, they're ripping us off. I'll be the greatest jobs president ever created, right? They've made us into puppets. I'll bring back all of our jobs. So all you're ever going to hear Trump talk about is jobs, but he's never once going to bring up our class structure. And this is the reality of our class structure. The top 20% of earners in our country receive 50% of all new income, and they own 90% of all the wealth in our country. So think about that. For the remaining 80% of us, thank goodness we have at least access to 50% of the new income, but we're vying over the table scraps of the remaining 10% of that wealth. So what that means is most of us in this country have absolutely no wealth, and the rest of us, right, when we're waiting on our income, we're probably just living paycheck to paycheck, and we're one emergency away from complete bankruptcy or some kind of emergency, economic emergency. That's really what's going on. So, and also, if you think what the Oxford economists are telling us, that within the next 20 years, we're going to have a major automation of jobs, right? So 50% of all jobs in the West could be going away within 20 years. Even jobs that we thought would be there for us for a long time, like those nice truck driving jobs. Well, we're finding out now that can be automated, and it's going to be way cheaper, right? You don't have to pay insurance or a place for this robot to stay than having a human driver. So we're going to have to start thinking about things like universal basic income and figuring out when there are people that want jobs, but there's just no jobs to be done, or there's just no good jobs that pay enough money to actually survive, what are we going to do? This is not even a part of the conversation right now, and that's ignoring the actual reality of what's going to be happening just within the next few years and happening right now. Think about the Democratic strongholds that flipped for Trump in 2016, right? They were Democrats. They voted for Obama in the previous election, and then when 2016 came, they voted for Trump. Especially Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Maine, New York, and Iowa. This is also where the Russian propaganda effort was focused through Facebook and Twitter in order to try to get Trump elected into the White House. So these areas were very heavily targeted through the propaganda campaign. But of course, these are white working class people that are looking to change their situation as is, and so they're not looking for a particular party, a Republican or Democratic Party. They're looking for a leader that's speaking to them. Something Clinton really failed to do during this election. Also, this idea that we're all separated either by we're conservative or you're a liberal. Well, also, if you begin to look at the country, zoom out and look at it sociologically, you begin to understand that's really rural versus metropolitan areas, right? All the red in this map is where Trump received the vote, and it's all in rural areas. All these little dots of blue are the metropolitan areas. And so we have this big divide. And so us city people, where 90% of the people are, need to be able to go out to our rural separated brethren and bring them back into the fold and say, hey, this party has not forgotten the white working class. It's not just a party of minorities and radical liberals, right? This is a party that actually cares about how much money you have in your pocket day in and day out. This has to change. This has to change. Rhetorical move 2, this idea that he's going to take on scientific and political leaders, right? As if he were smarter than all of them, and they have hurt us. And a lot of the ways he does this is using a tactic I think I learned in 7th grade in the junior high playground. I think that might be the last time I've used this tactic, and that's called name calling, right? Sleepy Joe, Crazy Biden, White Bill, Lion Ted, and having all these people up and making all these ridiculous names and being on stage with Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz comparing penis size turned our political discourse into a farce and has degraded our discourse and continues to do so today. Think about how also he took on scientific experts talking about how windmills are going to kill all these birds and make our landscape ugly. Even the Centers of Disease Control, his administration recommended that they would not be able to use certain words within their documents like evidence-based, science-based, vulnerable, fetus, all these words are stricken from the record. It reminds me of Orwellian 1984 newspeak, or some kind of thought control to erase words, really, that have to do with science. And of course, the Trump administration wants to paint science as this giant conspiracy theory that's trying to get us to do things like wear masks and other horrible ideas. Rhetorical move 3, demonizing the other. It's the immigrants, or it's the third world countries that Trump calls shithole countries, or the followers of Islam. It's all these people that are the problem, bringing crime and drugs, and really the racism has had no bounds during this administration, and hate crimes since the inauguration have spiked. Also, squandering resources on a southern border wall. Very little has been built. It's not really a wall, and I've seen videos of the wall that has been built, and a strong gust of wind knocks it over. Someone easily uses a grappling hook and is over within less than a minute. So this is all, these are all lies. He's not really building the border wall. And it's also just a way to say to people that feel xenophobic or scared of other cultures, hey, just leave it to me. I'll make sure we keep the baddies out and the goodies. And it's this idea, it's as old as time. Keep the barbarians at the gates, and we're the true civilization, and we're the ones that can teach the world something. I would like to talk about this a little bit, capitalizing upon anxieties about sociocultural change. And this is especially true amongst the evangelical base. And I want to talk not about the evangelical base right now. I want to talk to the evangelical base. Think about what's happened in our country. Think about the last State of the Union address. Trump won't shake our Democratic Speaker Nancy Pelosi's hand. Pelosi won't respect Trump's words and ends up ripping his speech at the end. So it really looks like this horrible divorce scenario where Trump is the liar, the womanizer, won't shake hands, and Pelosi's like the mother who's fed up in constant prayer and ripping up her speech. And I can really understand why both parties feel the way they do. Put yourself in the other person's position and think about the hurt feelings. Like for the Democrats, the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, the transphobia, the 8 years of obstructionism during the Obama administration, we couldn't get anything done. This could cause a lot of bitterness. But then look from the conservative viewpoint, right? There's the political issues that are mainly important that I hear about spoken there are abortion and gay marriage. And for the evangelicals and other Christians, these are unforgivable sins that are produced by a morally corrupt and demonically influenced enemy. So imagine trying to have a conversation when the person across from you literally thinks you're being influenced by demons. It's kind of hard to have, I think, to even start with a rational conversation if that's the case. But one of the reasons I think this is happening and why there's so much fear and anger and hate is because of Fox News. And Fox News has a very giant megaphone. 50% of all conservatives watch Fox News while liberals are watching all kinds of different news. And so, news stations. And so, it has a disproportionate effect within the conservative mind. And I've seen it take down many a sane, independent, and open-minded person into a deep paranoia about so-called big government. In fact, my grandfather, at the end of his life, went into a deep paranoia by watching hours and hours of Fox News, fostering a righteous indignation at anyone who doesn't share their exact worldview, and creating a whole generation of people who are becoming rabidly intolerant. And think about how Fox News causes self-loathing within the white working class themselves, against making them work against their own economic interest. While they languish in poverty, they have no access to health care, no access to a college education, no access to child care. They've even become convinced that it's wrong to tax the rich, even though they're paying out a larger portion of their own income. Since 2018, the Trump tax cuts, for the first time in American history, the working class pays more proportionally out of their income than the top 1% does. That's quite an accomplishment. And so, following the logic of capitalism as far as it'll possibly go, so now the rich equals virtuous and deserving, and the poor equals morally defunct and undeserving freeloaders. Why didn't you work harder, right? If we look at who voted for the president by religious affiliation, we see it is white, born-again evangelical Christians, over 80%, and that has not gone down at all. Of course, you'll ask the question, well, I thought religious people cared about truth and people not lying and helping the poor and bringing unity, right, and not division. Well, we have to understand. So the question is, how do the fascist Republican Party at this point convince approximately 35% of the American people, or put another way, 80% of white evangelicals to vote against their own interests, their own pocketbook, their own well-being, their own advancement? How does this happen? Well, I think the answer obviously is culture. They convince them that they share the same cultural values. You don't like abortion, you don't like gay bathrooms, or genderless bathrooms, right? So by limiting politics to these two key issues, it feeds the moral superiority of the traditionalists. It makes them feel good. But in my view, evangelicals, the GOP have lost the moral high ground. Think about this. Do you have the right to elect Trump when you see a brazen, unbroken string of lies? Can you claim to be the party of morality? Do you have the right to give advice on how to treat children when we witness this administration separating children from parents, locking them in cages, and denying them vaccinations while they languish and die? Do you have the right to say that you're the party that protects the vulnerable when we witness Trump bragging about grabbing women's genitals without verbal consent because of his celebrity status? I've been in a lot of locker rooms and I've never once bragged about grabbing genitals or compared penis sizes. In fact, if I saw someone talk about that at a job interview, I wouldn't hire them to be the assistant manager of Foot Locker, much less the President of the United States. So my message to the evangelicals is, just because someone lets you in the White House to lay hands on them in an open display of prayer, not in the closet like is suggested in the scripture, doesn't mean you have a moral president. Maybe he's just trying to manipulate you with the same used car salesman tactics he relied on his entire life. Case in point, Trump University, a complete sham, ripping people off so bad he had to pay out $25 million in damages. Of course, we saw in 2016 that he was positioning himself to be on the side of LGBT or women, but since then we know that that's not true. That's simply not true, and of course he is not for a woman's right to choose. A lot of this, if you think about this, the social cultural anxiety is a decline in confidence in our institutions. At least with the presidency or being on the Supreme Court, you have about 40% of Americans say, I have confidence, a positive confidence in it, right? If you look here, though, in Congress, only 11% of Americans are saying they have confidence in this. And so this gives the president more room, and more authority, more power because of the gridlock that's been happening over the last 3 decades, and the American people are fed up and want Congress to act and get things done for them. All right, so we're moving from diagnostic, how he says, here's the problems, and now we're moving to prognostic, what are the solutions that's being offered. First, I just want to talk a little bit about messaging. Trump takes directly from Reagan's campaign, Make America Great Again. He's trying to set himself up as the new Reagan coming in. Remember, Reagan came in the 1980s with the counter-revolution. Same idea. Bring in the evangelicals, bring in the libertarians, bring in the anti-communists, create this kind of party around this, right? So, and also making America great again. If you have to think, the way that liberals think about history and time is that we're progressing through time and things keep getting better, right? Women got the right to vote, black people get the right to vote, Gay and lesbian people aren't locked up anymore in mental institutions. Now they can get married openly, right? So there's this kind of history of progress. For the fascists, they don't think of history as a straight line like that. They think of it in cycles, cyclical, right? There's this great golden age that we have, and now it's in decline and everything got horrible, but maybe we'll raise up a leader and everything will be great again, right? So you have this idea of bringing back this lost golden age from the past. And so Trump's trying to tap into this view of time within the fascist mindset, right? Let's bring back something that did exist in the past back into the future and make things like they used to be. Also, Trump takes from Nixon's messaging the silent majority. Who's he talking about there? Well, Nixon in 1969 was running, and of course this was the time during which we got rid of our racial apartheid and women's movements, environmental movements, anti-nuclear movements, anti-consumerism movements were all coalescing into a broader countercultural movement. And who were those people? I guess they were the vocal minority, right? And so by implication, he's saying, I'm for the silent majority. I'm not for these civil rights protesters. I'm not for all this change. I'm for this silent majority out there instead. So Trump takes this silent majority stand, placing himself against the civil rights movement at this time as well. Also taken from this is the idea of law and order, and we can see Trump running around right now saying, I have to send federal troops in Democrat cities because they're out of control. And this, of course, is to rile his base up and instill fear in his base. And saying things like the Democrats want complete open borders and they want Antifa to run around and burn down the courthouse and everything else. It's completely untrue. You can't find any Democratic candidate in the country saying we should have completely open borders where everybody just walks in and out, and that we shouldn't have any kind of policing. Of course, this is how he positions himself, though, to be seen as this kind of authoritarian candidate that's on the side of the police. He can't even acknowledge the protests as something positive or a discussion or cultural consciousness that's being aroused to actually bring more equality into our society, which we know social movements do. The last messaging that he uses may be the most disturbing. This idea of America First. There was an America First committee right before the Second World War in 1940. It was anti-Semitic and pro-fascist. It had 800,000 paying members and 450 chapters. We see Trump rebranding this America First message within his own campaign. So, resonances from fascism, of American fascism in the past. I don't want to spend much time on this because I think it's very obvious. Describing as a strong man that demands obedience in exchange for protection. I just want to read you a little bit of this speech from Indiana in 2018. We're talking about being tough, right? So first he talks about the miners, and then he's going to talk about immigration control. Here's what he says. I've had an incredible experience with the miners. We were backstage. There were 9 of them. Wow, these were tough guys. They're seriously tough cookies. In fact, I looked at them and I said, I wouldn't want to fight these guys. Do you have any idea what ICE does? Immigration. Does anybody in the room? I don't think anybody knows what they do unless they're really tough. I know a couple of people right here, and they're probably tough enough. I don't know, though. Maybe not. I know their weaknesses, so I think they're not. Look, they're clapping for ICE. They're clapping because these are brave people. They're good people, too. Good heart. But they're tough. They're tough, they're strong, and they're tough. Right? So, the idea that we don't really need a democratic society. We just need this strong man for people to rally around and be tough. And usually this happens through this kind of patriarchal, masculine display of power. And this is the bargain he's offering the American people. Part of this, as well, is a rhetorical move, threatening violence to our political opponents. And if you look on your screen, these are all real things that Trump said at rallies. I'm not going to go through all these, but I'll read one of them to you. He says, in Las Vegas, he said to the security guards, he's walking out with big high fives, smiling, laughing. I'd like to punch him in the face, I tell you. And then a month later in Michigan, he says, get him out. try not to hurt him, but if you do, I'll defend you in court. Don't worry about it, right? So threatening violence and promising protection for allies, this is already happening. This goes right along with empathizing with far-right social movements who are willing to use violence in order to prove a political point. We see here on the left him posting himself as a Pepe the Frog, which is tied to white nationalist meanings and understandings. You see the Green Lives Matter sign here on the right, making fun of Black Lives Matter, but also saying something like, white nationalist lives matter, right? And Trump is associating himself with this extreme far-right group. Case in point, August 11, 2017, torch rally. These are the protesters Trump was calling very fine people as they marched through the University of Virginia, chanting the Nazi agricultural minister's slogan, "Blood and soil, Jews will not replace us, and white lives matter." These were Trump's very fine people. Also, if you think about it, you think, well, Trump can't truly be fascist because he doesn't have any paramilitary squad at his disposal, so this makes him different from the historical fascists. And I say, true, the party itself doesn't have access to this kind of force, but the Oath Keepers, the 3% militia, the Proud Boys, these are all groups that are carrying weapons. On the right, they hate Congress. They're only listening to what the president says. If the president says we need to go down to the border and protect it with guns, they go do that. They come to the president's rally and operate as security. They end up showing up at Black Lives Matter protests, guarding businesses. They tend to insert themselves within scenes of national crisis and tension. So do I think he has black shirts or brown shirts at his disposal? Indirectly. Yes. All right, and then political tactics. There's more lies than this. This is kind of old news, but on July 9th, the president crossed the 20,000 mark. This means he's making 23 false or misleading statements a day. His top 3 lies are, number 1, that the U.S. economy is the best it's ever been in history. That's simply not true. That his border wall is being built. Again, not true. And that he's passed the biggest tax cut in American history. There were 3 or 4 other presidents that passed bigger tax cuts. So these are giant lies, but even with this COVID thing, the lying is becoming crazy. He's almost creating a whole alternative reality to live in, saying things like, oh, the virus is going to go away any moment, and everybody can get back to normal. These are things we may want to hear, but simply aren't true. Simply aren't true. Of course, mainstream media is fake news, and so anything the media says, the media is meant to be there as our fourth estate in order to help us with our checks and balances in our government and to keep everyone honest. But if Trump is able to paint the mainstream media as always telling lies, then of course he becomes the truth teller, and no one else can say anything else about it. Part of this is a strategy of spreading conspiracy theories. He began with a racist conspiracy theory, birther conspiracy theory that Obama was born in another country, and he's continued to do so, for instance, with Spygate, saying Obama and Biden have spied on his campaign. And the FBI, the CIA, and every other government institution that does police work, detective work, have said this is simply not true. So, not to mention going on InfoWars in Austin, Texas, which spreads all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories like the Sandy Hook school shooting was a hoax, and 9/11 was an inside job. So he goes on programs like this, and also supports the QAnon conspiracy. He won't speak out against it because it's to his benefit, saying basically he's this amazing savior that's saving all these children from a pedophile ring run by Tom Hanks and Hillary Clinton and other Hollywood people, which is also completely insane. Okay, tactic 2, spreading falsehoods. Probably the worst thing Trump does is spread falsehoods about the integrity of the electoral process. For instance, he said to Time Life, Republicans don't win because of potentially illegal votes. Here's what they do. When people get in line, they have absolutely no right to vote. They go around in circles. Sometimes they go to their car, put on a different hat, put on a different shirt, come back in, and vote again. It's really a disgrace what's going on. There's no evidence of this. I looked at research done by the Brookings Institute about voter fraud within the United States. And after he made this statement, Trump actually created a voter fraud commission that he put Mike Pence in charge of to investigate all the voter fraud. And there was such a lack of fraud that commission had to be disbanded very quickly. And we see Trump, of course, trying to attack our electoral processes. He's asked Russia to do so. He's asked China to do so. I wouldn't be surprised if he's asked Ukraine to do so. He's trying to dismantle part of the United States Post Office now so we can't get all the votes in because he knows that there's going to be an extremely high amount of mail-in voting this time. And he's openly admitted that if everyone gets to vote, that the Republicans will lose. So it's in his interest to try to suppress the vote as much as possible. This is very anti-democratic. The last thing I will say about Trump's complete fantasy world that is creating, which is causing our country to fall into a very serious state of fascism, is that he disregards his own intelligence agencies. He won't even take his intelligence briefings with the CIA, the FBI. He's calling them the deep state as if there were some secret underground administrative bureaucracy that was actually controlling everything. It's not. We have three branches of government: the judicial, the executive, and the Congress, right? The legislative. So those are the ones that are in charge. This is also something he's doing. Now, drain the swamp, meaning we should get rid of some of this state. He has cut a lot of people from a lot of our governmental agencies, and some people may see that as a good thing. But what's interesting, he's actually increased so many people working at Homeland Security and Veterans Affairs that whatever he would have drained as far as us paying tax money to pay for all these people to exist and have jobs, he's actually caused more jobs than when he got in there. So although he's cut at most agencies, what he's built up at these two others means that he hasn't drained the swamp at all. He's actually added to the administrative state. All right. Last slide. I want to say a few things to us Democrats who need our conservative friends to come in and vote with us this time, but also to our conservative friends who are thinking about what's the right thing to do at this moment. I think we should reach across the left-right divide, show empathy for working class people, for rural people, talk about the values we share in common, like community, taking care of one another, common decency, respect for our traditions, respect for our religious traditions, our local traditions. Also, being non-defensive, right? If someone says something that offends you, unless it's directly about to hurt you or you're under attack, what are you so afraid of? Be secure in your own thoughts, but also in a democracy is not going to work unless we're able to hear what another person has to say. This political media environment is just trying to drive us further and further apart. We have to come out of this and be able to look at each other in the eyes again and talk to one another again. Saying in terms of the conversation around standards of factuality and evidence, if we can't agree on the facts, we really can't move forward. We have to say, it's not the My Pillow guy I should be listening to from Fox News about what to do with the coronavirus. It's the Center for Disease Control because they have the scientific facts, right? Right? We have to set this standard. We need common ground to have serious conversations, not just crazy conspiracy theory tangents. Helping others come to realizations. Instead of shoving, a lot of times we think, well, I know the answers, here's what I think, and here's what I wish everybody would do, and if everybody would just do what I thought, then the world would be a virtual utopia. No. Say things, say what you think, but leave room for others to come to realizations. I know a lot of times I've changed my mind, not when someone was telling me, you should change your mind because you're wrong. It's because they told me their opinion, they let me have time to go think, let it marinate, and I thought, they're right. I'm probably not completely right about this issue, whatever it was, right? And so allowing people to have time to breathe and hear what's going on. Also, recognize we all want to be the hero in our own narrative. Democrats want to be the hero saving the country. Republicans want to be the hero saving the country. We all see ourselves in the good role. So make sure that you're finding out what that person thinks and see where you can compromise. What are they wanting to do that you may agree with, right? Find places of agreement in order to establish that kind of relationship. Also, we have to check our moral superiority, right? A lot of people on the right think, well, I'm religiously superior and all these people are wrong. Or a lot of people on the left think, well, I'm scientifically right, and so anybody who doesn't agree with the science, how could you really? They're wrong, right? So making sure you're not prejudiced yourself, self-reflection is the key here. So I've left all the references to a lot of the events I've been talking about and the speeches here. I want to thank everybody for listening to this video. Of course, you can always email me. All my information is there in the box below. And we need to work together to move past this neo-fascism creeping in, infecting our conservative people, and come out and say, hey, there's other options here. There is a compassionate conservatism. There is still liberalism that we can move into. And, you know, I say to you conservatives, also, what are these liberals talking about? What are they thinking about? Maybe there is something that you could find to agree with liberals as well. All right, thank you very much.